Hello, everyone. This is Phil Green, Lucidea's COO. I'd like to welcome you all to the webinar, Key Trends in Special Libraries, a conversation with Stephen Abram. So I would like to again thank everyone for attending, and we will start the webinar at this point. Today's webinar, briefly, is we'll have a brief introduction on Lucidea. We will talk a little bit about our guiding principles, and then we will get directly into the presentation itself. So with that, what I'd like to do is tell you a little bit about Lucidea. Our mission is to redefine how knowledge is shared. We are a company that is both new and quite old. We are comprised of a large number of brands that have been around for a number of years: Sydney and Magic, Quadrastar, Lookup Precision, Argus, and Lawport. Many of you have used those products, are using those products, look forward to using those products. But Lucidea itself is a new company that we brought together so we could create one brand for all of the products that I've just mentioned. Now, we run our company around a set of core beliefs, and these beliefs drive how we build our products, how we like to work with customers, and how we like to have you implement and then use our products. And those beliefs briefly are, they're obviously in the space that we operate in. Access to information is critical. Information discovery, we believe, is more than just keyword search, so we try to provide a variety of options there: browsing, faceted searching, pushing, so on and so forth in terms of discovery. In terms of independence, we believe that you need to be independent of your vendor, that is us, as well as of IT, so that you should be able to implement your solutions and run them yourself with as little interference as possible and as much, basically, use by simply the content manager themselves. We believe that in KM systems and library and these sorts of systems that you need to integrate with the IT infrastructure around you and other data repositories that your customers need to use. So integration is key. Security, all of this cannot happen without proper security. Bad guys shouldn't be able to get at your information, and the right person should get the right information and not the wrong information. So security is paramount for us. And partnership, we believe that your success is our success. And in that sense that we believe in mutual success, and that's what we mean by partnership. So with that, what I'm going to do is launch us directly into our webinar for today. And we are privileged to have Stephen Abram with us today. Stephen is a very experienced librarian and information industry leader. His many insights that apply to the world of special librarians and special library sustainability. It's important to recognize challenges to the profession, what Stephen calls the difficult stuff, but even more important is the imperative to create a path to take action, to proactively go out and be in front of things, and to future-proof your library. Welcome, Stephen. Thank you for being here.
You use the word "the difficult stuff" that I use all the time, and I think it's really important to frame that properly, and I think it's a critical issue with information professionals. It's important that it is difficult for us and for our organizations, our host organizations. If it wasn't difficult, they wouldn't need a professional to manage their information interfaces, the human and the technology confluence that happens. Sometimes, as information professionals, we make it look so easy, and we disguise the thought, the intelligence, the learning, the relationships, and the professionalism that's needed for our strategies to be a success. When we do something really well, it just looks really easy, and it isn't. Like, that's why we have professional training. It's why we continuously upgrade ourselves and upgrade our skills and look at and keep our eye on the horizon on what's new in technology. Many of us started in the old days, sometimes before search boxes, and now we're into a world where simple search versus advanced search, tiled searching, all that stuff. So while it's important that we make it easy for the end user client, it's also important that we spend time making our bosses aware of the effort and thought and education required to do this difficult stuff right. One key point is that in this information age, we're inventors. We're inventing the path. When we talk about that path, we have to recognize amongst ourselves that there's no fully developed map. When the internet hit, and then the web hit, and then YouTube hit, and online streaming and ebooks, we didn't know what the path was. We invented it with our vendors, with our software vendors and our aggregators and our digitization experts, but also ourselves and our users. And there's no atlas for us to point to show us the way. It's our education and our experience coming together to invent the new path for our organizations to be using and adapting information to their decisions, the ones our clients make. And because we're doing it productively and proactively, we're supporting higher quality of decision making, and we always need to tie what decisions are made to the activities we do, so we don't look like we're installing software and doing transactions.
So super. Thank you, Stephen, for that exciting intro there, and to kick us off. So today, what we're going to do with Stephen is we're going to talk about the following 8 topics. This will be interactive, and as I said, if you have questions along the way, please feel free to use the Q&A widget. I will try to interject those questions along the way, but these are the topics that we'll talk about today.
And we do live in interesting times with a huge number of trends to address. I think I track about 100 major ones, but the top 8 that we chose today are around what I think are the most important things to look at in your filter bubble in a specialized library environment where you're working with specialized clients. We often have deeper relationships. So Phil and I are going to explore them in more depth, but we're going to focus on these trends and how you make choices to deliver impact and value to our host organizations and our key clients.
Great, thank you. So with that, we'll kick it off. Trend number 1 that we're going to look at is what we refer to as the beauty contest. And whether you like it or not, you are competing with Facebook, LinkedIn, Amazon, other websites that your users use every day. Does your website measure up, or do you look like the odd man out? If your website looks old, your content looks old. Here are a few tips that we provide to clients as we help them implement library and KM systems. First, don't make your OPAC, your homepage and your OPAC, look like 5 search boxes. Make it look like Google search, and then provide options for advanced search. Deploy modern UI elements like tag clouds, even if you don't allow social tagging. For example, a subject field can be thought of as top-down tagging, but then can be displayed in a visually interesting way like a tag cloud. Add visual images to your website, even just corporate images, and make them dynamic just to break up the text and to add visual appeal. Add RSS or other dynamic content to keep your website changing and current. And enable alerts so you can push content to users. You can feed them content and get them to come back to the site for details. This way you remind users of your relevance on an everyday basis.
And I think you're right that the Facebooks, LinkedIn, Googles, Amazons, eBays of the world are setting an expectation. And there isn't a librarian out there who hasn't heard, why can't you make it work just like Google? And my response to that is always, yeah, we could do that. Do you want to have the answer that someone paid you to have? Do you want to use search engine optimization to push things to the top that are based on popularity instead of quality or being right or aligned with our corporate goals and things like that? And that helps generate a conversation about what we do around, the current word is curation. But we select things based on how they align with our understanding, our deeper understanding of what our users do. And so beauty may be in the eye of the beholder, but everyone can agree what's ugly, and ugly is pretty common in the digital world. One of the challenges is where people get comfortable, and they get comfortable when they're in context. One of our benefits in a specialized library environment is we have a little more control over context. We know that they're using a narrower range of devices. We know that they're on our intranet, and we have some control. So we have a little bit of control, so we can create comfort with a higher level of information density. So if you look into the research on information density, you can see that people can see 5 or 6 things, or on something like an Amazon screen, last time I counted, there were over 75 elements above the fold on the main screen. Yet people are quite comfortable on a site like Amazon or eBay. So we need to understand the context of our user. And then we need to know what they're doing, and what they're doing in the context of their goals. Are they exploring or discovering or just retrieving? Are they reading or are they scanning? Design changes based on their process and based on their goals, which are 2 separate things. Do they just want a proof or a fact, or are they looking for depth? And what context, or what stages of their research or business process is depth important, and when is just an answer important? And then how do we support productivity on that? So think about their context. For example, is your news feed designed to be read first thing every morning over their wake-up content? Then what context do you put on that? I've seen libraries put a little peek, a steaming GIF of a coffee there, which, you know, connects it on a subliminal level. But in that point, scannability is crucial. On the other hand, when a report is huge, what tools do you offer to break it up? Do you have to dig for the table of contents, or is it easy to get at on a sidebar on another tile? Can you provide a word cloud or other tool that breaks up the content and gives them highlights? How about abstracts and executive summaries? The tools that create automated abstracts and executive summaries are pretty cool right now. Too many library services lead to overwhelming sets of content and too big for the time I have reports. Productivity suffers, and then so does usage. When information isn't used to support decisions quality risks being substandard. So related to this is the dominant learning styles of your clients, and it plays a huge role here. Are your users like you? Are they strong text readers like lawyers, or are they more visual like museum professionals or engineers? Choose the number of visuals carefully based on your client's learning styles, but don't leave out visuals entirely. Too much text overwhelms. And don't leave out things like layout, bold, color, not underline so much because that means it's a link, but using layout and indents. You know, we didn't spend hundreds of years since we started publishing books focusing on layout to get to this point where we're back into the illuminated manuscript role, where we actually have illumination on our websites, to leave it off again. Even if they are text-based learners, that doesn't exempt you from good layout practices. Too many web pages are undifferentiated text with no tiles, no scannability, some lines, or worse, putting text across the whole portrait of the monitor. Like, the monitor needs to be understood that there's a page size that's portrait, but the monitor is landscape. And so designing around the weaknesses of the television-driven monitor has been a challenge for us over the years. How do we reduce scrolling? All these issues are exacerbated when they are not tested and adapted for the mobile environment. Tablets, phones, whatever. I'm surprised at the number of times I've been sitting with librarians in a bar or a coffee shop and said, look at your website on your phone, and they've never done it. And then they look at it and they're horrified. Or they're happy a few times, happy that it turned out okay. So basically choose carefully. It may look pretty usable to you on your screen and meet some other trend in the marketplace, but it could cause issues for your clients when their real needs are taken into consideration. If you're, for example, medical professionals using Medline, the important stuff is often buried, or using drug information databases. I had a friend who was searching on Medline, and she's reading this really long record, and it was telling her that she had broken her hip by falling in the bathtub. She was just in her 40s, and she had her hip replaced very quickly, and it was starting to squeak. So everywhere she walked, her hip was squeaking, and it was bothering her. So she looked up squeaking hips and was reading the thing, and it was talking about that it was a bad thing, and then it got worse, and then they started talking amputation, and she was getting very upset until she got to the point where one of the diagnostic tests was to hold the patient's paw, when she realized she was reading a veterinary record, an animal research record, and it had nothing to do with the human body. And that's the kind of thing that librarians can get out of the way of by building in human stuff into the search box, so that you get rid of a lot of the mistakes that some end users would make, and it lowers training costs. So there's just opportunities here to really, really improve the experience, while at the same time making it look good for people in context.
And what we're going to do is bring up, I've got a homepage now up. This is the kind of homepage that we would advise you to create. It's got good visual appeal. It's got lots of white space. I actually have a question on the issue of graphics and ADA compliant. We certainly build our products so that the portals are ADA compliant, 508 compliant, accessible. And I think one of the key things is it doesn't, just because it's visually attractive doesn't mean it can't be accessible. So you can do that through the software. Bad sites can overuse graphics and use them in the wrong way, and that impedes accessibility. But well-designed websites and well-designed software certainly can provide good visual appeal, while at the same time conforming to legal requirements that you may have as a government agency.
And this site shows supporting different learning styles. It's got the right kind of 25, 50, 25 layout, but you can look at the visuals and you can tell whether someone's a dominant visual learner versus a text learner, whether your eyes are drawn to the names of those icons or you're drawn to the icon. For some people, especially people with non-fully blind but visually impaired, the icons work much faster. You can also have your eye drawn to that word cloud, which shows you popular tags and continues in context as you do your keyword searching, so that you don't have to know how to review a record and look in the subject headings and find the right word to do your search with.
So great. With that, we'll move on to topic number 2, Google and free content. Now, we know that users often don't start their search for content at your OPAC. It's just not where they go. How do you bring them back? I'd like to start with an old adage: first be the same, then be better. And so when we talk about being the same, again, can you make your homepage look like Google? Look like something that they've used before, not making yourself look like the odd man out. And then provided links to advanced search for more options. Can you offer Google content as well as your own content? So in fact, offering both via, say, a federated search type of capability. And then you might want to be better. Can you offer more content than Google? Can you federate in terms of your federated search capabilities? Can you offer access to external subscription content or internal repositories as part of your OPAC? Can you offer things like faceted search, which helps people filter their content more quickly? So first be the same, then try to look to be better.
I think one of the things is we'll talk about this a little later on the analytics side, but where are your users coming from? And so with some of my clients, we know that 50% of the searches in their online catalog, they started at Amazon. So the research was, what did Amazon do better than we were doing, that you were coming in from Amazon and then just looking for author title searches? We're also finding that 90 to 98% of the searches were author titles. So they were doing known item searching. That's not discovery. It's certainly not showing the value of the OPAC for its work. And so when we start looking at federating things, how do you federate yourself with parts of Google? So you can unfetter it. Like Google, yeah, it's free, but most libraries are free to the end user. They're paid for at the community or the enterprise level. So you can unfetter it by making it a better service. And so Google is better at answering those who, what, when questions. It isn't so good at the how and why questions. Businesses, firms, the kind of people that special librarians work with are the people who are doing the how and why questions, the hard questions, the ones that require additional professional skills plus some kind of information fluency. So how do we unfetter things? So in the old days, we could use the Google APIs or use the APIs to make our book content full text searchable from Google Books, or we would use the enterprise level Google appliances. Used to be the yellow box or the blue box, I forget what they call it now. And then we need to truly understand the role of federated search, because we keep teaching search skills, which our average user defines as the simple box on Google, when they don't know where to search. And our challenge is that we've curated a set of dozens and hundreds of high-quality, unique databases of stuff that's not on Google that costs a pretty penny, and they don't know to search it. So federated search deals with the question of where to search, and this two-step process of, first let's find out where to search. I didn't know there was a specialized database on HIV or oncology, or a specialized one on legal awards. So how do we find it? And then we can move into some of the tools that we're offering for deeper search. So you can integrate the big G into your OPAC and also work your defaults to promote the high quality context and content to the first page. And a lot of that is around visual and tiled displays, so that you can have 6 tiles there showing this is what's coming up from a research database, this is what's coming up from a public policy or news database. And those tiled displays are very quickly adapted to by end users who work in that context every day. So they can develop comfort fairly quickly with a two-step approach and a tiled response, rather than going for a simple bibliographic style search. I once asked people at Google why they didn't do visual responses, and they kept on doing this list stuff, and the answer I got was they couldn't figure out how to put the ads in the visual response, remembering that ads are driving Google's model, not the best answer.
Right, and so I think that we've talked about kind of bringing Google into your portal, but again, the other side of that is if people are starting from Google, you want to do things like create a content feed for Google for your if you're a public site, having a content feed so that the Google can index your site, but that also applies on an intranet. You want to make sure that you have a content feed which allows your enterprise search engine or SharePoint or the Google appliance to search your site. So whether you are public or you're a private site or an intranet site, you want to use content feeds so when people start someplace else, they will be driven back to your content if it's relevant. But then, as Stephen was also saying, you want to use the power of Google to your advantage and incorporate that in interesting ways into your site. One interesting way is using the Google. That Google has a capability called a custom Google search site, and what that does is allows you to specify what sites, what public sites you want to integrate in and only search when you do a search. If you can put that onto a federated search tile, then what you do is you provide high quality content, very focused content to your users very easily. So there are a number of ways in which you want to leverage Google, bringing them into your site, making them help people find your site, and then using Google for specialized search and custom search, which will enhance the way people find information.
And all of this goes down to the secret magic that librarians have that no one else has. So our ability to work with a full suite of organizational tools, from taxonomies to information architectures, to impact relevance and recall, and then to tie that to the productivity and quality of answers our end users receive. So we know that our senior management is concerned about the quality of answers that are supporting the decisions that are made in their organization, but they're also concerned about the productivity impacts of poorly designed intranets or going with seat of the pants kind of Google searches. So that whole relevance and recall thing is a hot topic. My old 1980s librarian stuff.
So perfect. We're on to slide topic number 3, and Stephen, I think I'll let you go first on this slide.
Well, I think we all know that tech's just a tool. It's not our master, but that's not how we act. We let it drive us. We need to keep our eye on it and choose carefully. But I always say there's a couple of frames that are handy to use. One is, what am I inheriting from my organization? Am I inheriting an intranet that's sort of I may or may not have had an involvement in getting? Am I on Microsoft SharePoint? Do I have certain HR systems? What social media are we using? Do we have internal Yammer and Salesforce.com stuff? And then how does that relate to my work? And things like Yammer and Salesforce and HR systems start to allow me to build customer relationship management systems and permissioning systems onto the intranet. Promoting certain database to certain core users because I've organized them or cataloged all my users. And then we ask, what do I need to be great? What differentiates my services from others and adds value for the effort? So we can look at other professionals who work in content management, marketing, records management, our own ILS or RSS feeds. But what we really want to look at is what's the personal differentiation here, and how seamlessly can my training, my information fluency, my research support, my relationships change the dynamics of how we use content in this organization. And then the third thing I look at with tech, and when tech becomes the master, it forces you to do things their way. And when you do it their way, it's usually not good because there's a learning load on you, and that learning load can be quite steep. You multiply that learning load across 300, 1,000, I know libraries that are serving 40, 50, 60,000 users. That learning load becomes a really huge issue. And so how do we build marketing and training and awareness things to reduce the learning load on our end users for what's related to their work? Does technology become the Borg, or am I that little radical revolutionary who asks the question, am I in control or is the tech in control, and when do I give control to the end user? When do I respect the end user skills, and when do I respect my skills around presenting them the right stuff? I often see too often library strategies that give you all the ingredients for success, but it's like giving somebody, well, here's all the ingredients, maybe you can make a meal, maybe you can't. And so they really want the meal, and then they can decide what they're doing with it. So I always say with technology, strategy, goals, and priorities first, then choose your tech from the wealth of opportunities, internal and external, so it puzzles together in the context of the end user's productivity and their decision-making goals.
And as a technology vendor, people often assume that we want customers to focus on the technology, but that's not really the case. In fact, what we want you to do exactly what Stephen just said, which is it's very important for us to be very, very clear going in to any implementation. What are the priorities? What are the goals? Let's focus on those items. Let's make sure those are front and center. And then what we can do is make sure that the technology can support those goals, and you can end up with a successful project. As I said at the beginning, without a successful project, our partnership falls apart. And from our perspective, what is the most important thing here is to have a successful project, and therefore our technology has to support those goals, not the other way around. And one of the key things we also have folks focus on as we work in implementation is how do we support current processes? Because the more you can fit into the current process that people are using, the easier it is to gain adoption. And the quicker you gain adoption, again, the faster you get to success. So we think a lot when we build technology. How do we make the technology frictionless? How do we make it easily adoptable? How do we require as little training as possible to get into the product, to use the page, to find the information you seek? So again, we don't focus on the tech, but rather focus on your goals and ensure that the tech is going to support those goals with as little disruption to users as possible. And with rapid adoption, what you're most likely to see is success in your site. So with that, we'll turn to topic number 4, which is competition from publishers. High level, one of the things that we notice on a regular basis is that publishers want you to use their products directly. Sometimes they want to bypass the library, but we often see that this is the exact opposite of what users really want. Users don't really want to go to 15 different publisher sites. They would really like to go to one OPAC, one portal, and be able to find the information they seek. So we really ask and challenge our customers to think about creating an OPAC which integrates and federates various publisher offerings so that you can become the one-stop shop from which that your users can perform a query and find all of the information that they seek.
Yeah, it's always interesting because when you see it as competition, our professional world as information professionals, librarians, can't exist without information providers. It just won't work. So viewing it as competition rather than as little battles as we discover the future together is a better way of framing it. Yes, there are publishers who will go around the library if they even knew it was there in the first place. One of the challenges there is it's more a symptom, if they're successful, that the library doesn't have the depth of relationships it needs. It hasn't moved its organization-wide strategy into the executive mindset, and it hasn't positioned it effectively. And so I've worked with a whole bunch of publishers and aggregators. I barely remember 2 conversations about profit, which when I'm talking to my colleagues working in libraries, they seem to think we spend all day long talking about profit when we spent all day long talking about how can we have an impact, how can we make a difference, because we make no money on the first year of a sale. So we only make money on renewals, and that means knowing what impact we have. So we looked at what the impact. So are we saving bucks? Are we saving time? Those are the 2 things that CEOs of Fortune 500 companies said they most valued about special librarian services. When SLA undertook the impact of the information professional research and did deep explicit interviews with the C-level people, mostly CEOs, that's what they told us. When your organization invests in high-cost studies, and some of these IT, medical, market reports are hugely expensive. They can be $25,000, $30,000 a pop, and it's a waste if they don't inform decisions. And many of these reports are quite dense and cover a landscape of issues. So we need to look at things like software, things like content from publishers. What is their value and how they do it, and what is the impact on saving bucks and saving time for the end user? So you see things like publishers putting out, vendors putting out reports on software as a service and the long-term savings in that, or educational publishers talking about what's the learning impact on standardized testing scores. There's a number of these reports showing up over the last few years as publishers realize that they need to make that difference. And that's the conversation they're having when they go around the library. And the library needs to be having that conversation internally on how they support that, because they've done the research with those executives on what's going to rattle the chairs in their attic and make them buy something or endorse it to move forward. So can we catalog and index expensive reports and pieces and make the access point of entry that is important to the searcher, not to the bibliographic record? Your extra effort pays off in productivity and decision-making support, and it pays, and that productivity issue is time and bucks. But the stories you can tell on top of that stop our end users from going with just what they already know, what they assume, or a brand they trust is most CEOs know that seat-of-the-pants decision-making is dangerous to organizations in rapidly changing time. So the publishers are trying to get their data into a just-for-you framework, and we're the part of the organization as information professionals that have relationships with the ultimate end user and that just-for-you strategies. We've evolved beyond the just-in-case stuff of the 60s and 70s to the just-in-time stuff of the 80s and 90s. This just-for-you, personalized or departmental RSS feeds and web pages tiered to groups, teams, or individuals. It requires more interviewing, more customization, and understanding the difference between customization and localization, but all the tools we need are there. And there's a lot of simple tricks to do so that we can whelm the user instead of overwhelming the user. I know of one librarian who got a surprise award of a six-figure bonus. It was something like $100,000 to $200,000 that the CEO of the company presented to her at an all-hands meeting of the whole company. He wanted to make a point that using the library saved the company millions of dollars, and that he wanted them to know that the research that this librarian had done had fundamentally changed the success rate of that company. And that's the kind of story you want out the other end. So in short, the publisher's not a competitor, you need them. You also need to know your needs and how a partnership needs to work. If you're not providing the service, then their sales pitch can work to others in your organization. So looking at some of their strategies on selling, figure out how you're selling to your C-suite.
And this whole kind of conversation reminds me very much of a story about a consumer goods company interaction with a publisher. And while we're at it, I'm going to try to address a question that was asked by the audience on federating some of your external databases when they may require passwords, as the content is often copyrighted with the external publishers. And I think that what we've talked about and what Stephen's mentioned is this notion of providing that one-stop shop for your services, but again wanting to leverage your use of external content. The publisher may not be in competition with you. You need them. They provide very, very valuable content. You want to include that. What you want to do is make it easier for users to find that data. The publisher at the first go-round kind of suggested that this company load their data up into the publisher's database, and that you would then do one query mixing the internal and external content. We don't tend to recommend that strategy, as what we tend to see is that the external content simply overwhelms the internal content. So as Stephen has recommended in previous topics, you want your data presented first, your highly curated, very expensive, highly targeted data. That's the first thing you want users to see. But if there's a second tile, another tab that presents publisher information, which is very valuable, that makes that kind of information much more accessible to users. You're providing one point of access to multiple kinds of content. Thirdly, again, to Stephen's issue of this, the issue of just for you time frame, if you can create multiple OPACs or multiple portals for different departments, and you can tune the kind of content, the kind of RSS feeds, the kind of tiles, the kind of federation you do for the sales guys versus the research scientists versus the C-suite. Those all have very different needs, and you might federate different kinds of content in there. Now, to the issue of federating content that may require passwords, so on and so forth, there are several ways you can deal with that. Some of them are quite straightforward. We've worked with a number of publishers like EBSCO that require passwords, and they're very straightforward ways to still federate that without a problem. Other publishers can use things like IP authentication, so you can authenticate for a gateway in your company, so a location can come on and use things. And there are other more complicated methodologies to solve that problem. But that's one of the things, again, you want to look for as you're implementing your tech. So if you can, the ability to integrate those publishers into your library portal and provide the launch point for many different services and many different kinds of content, in our mind, tends to be a big winner.
There was another question there around OCLC and LC and Google. It's been more than 15 years since all the OCLC records have been in Google. They use them quite strategically. In the early days, I made some recommendations to Jeff Bezos and to Barnes & Noble and the late lamented Borders, and they all ended up acquiring the OCLC data. OCLC is the backbone to a lot of these competitive services. I do like that show Criminal Minds, where the librarian in it, or at least I like to think of her as a librarian, the one that her office husband calls her baby girl, said, oh, if only there was a database of all the books in the world. And I keep meaning to have sent a letter to Criminal Minds saying, oh yeah, there is one that's got a lot of them in it. But it is the backbone of a lot of the services we use. And we are the people who created this master resource that is being used in interesting ways with linked data and other things in those core consumer-driven web services.
Great. So let's move to web analytics, and this is really about how you can use analytic tools to prove yourself and the kinds of questions you're going to get asked by others. And as a non-revenue generating entity, the library will always be under budgetary pressure, along with all the other cost centers in your organization, and therefore the ability to provide usage stats and other data will continue to be important. What's new and more frequent is the request to provide Google Analytics-like data to bosses or bosses' bosses. And really with the advent of the special library as a website and the increasing use of web analytics on the corporate website, you're going to get this request. Can you integrate Google Analytics into your website? The other thing we think you should think about and you want to look for in your tech is whether your library system / OPAC KM system can capture usage events such as logins, searches, downloads, all of which help you understand how people are using the data, as well as helping others understand how your website is being used.
Analytics are crucial, and they're pretty inexpensive now. There's some good professional tools and some good analytical tools that are available that cost a little more, but they're not off the deep end. when you look at the value they deliver. So you've got Google Analytics, you've got native analytics in your ILS and some of your licensed services, but where they fail though is they're just data. And people seem to like to get data and treat it like some magic bullet that if the number moves a little bit bigger. I know of one time where we reduced the number of clicks to get to the quality content by 50%. And at this vendor I was working at, we had a whole bunch of librarians threaten to cancel because their data numbers have gone down, even though they had actually doubled because the user was more satisfied, but they were looking at the data, not looking at the process. So data can be pretty random, and random is not your friend. What you really want is impact, outcomes, results, savings in time and dollars. That said, measurements can be pretty powerful, but measurements are 2 or more pieces of data put together that tell a story. And they're not a magic bullet either. What works best is stories. So I recommend you read Steve Denning's book. It's a little older now, but it's brilliant. It's called Springboard Stories by Steve Denning. He was at the World Bank. Stories can start with data and measures, but build on those to add meat to the skeleton. Craft enough stories about impact on productivity, quality decisions, and your role in corporate strategic priorities. Tailor these to what rattles chairs in that client's, that executive's, that department's addict and brain. Tell them often, you know you're being successful, and this is some of the work that Steve has done, and David Snowden, when he was at the Knowledge Management Center at IBM, is you can tell that your story is working when it goes viral, which means someone else in the organization is saying that story. It doesn't work if you tell just one person versus many, or one story, or give one presentation. It's part of an ongoing storytelling thing. So build on your analytics with measures of impact and outcomes and tell a story. And don't get all perfectionist about it. There's no one magic story either, but it's still worth trying, and I've seen it work really well.
Great. That'll move us to topic number 6. It's all about me. And again, in an area of budgetary pressure, too much focus on library or library issues can often be misplaced. Remember to keep your focus on serving your users. And while we know that self-promotion is not in everyone's DNA, make sure that people know when they are using or getting content from the library. So some simple examples are when you format a search citation. We still have to regularly tell customers not to start with a record ID or an LC classification number. These may be really useful for librarians, but most users are baffled by this sort of thing. Make your services look like the other services that your users use every day, rather than trying to make them different. I also hate the phrase, which you hear all the time out in the library world, which is you need to do more with less. I like the phrase do more with more. And what I don't mean by that is I understand you're under budgetary pressures, but the question is, can you make requests for budget that will allow you to serve the end users? If you can get out there and provide ROIs and provide scenarios, stories that help you the people setting the budget, your boss's boss, understand how those improvements will impact productivity across a wide variety of folks, those are the kinds of improvements you should focus on, and you will get approval for.
And it's all about me is an assumption people do because they say, well, it's working for me, this looks beautiful, and then they don't test it with their end users. And it's highly likely that your end users have different information-seeking behaviors than you. That would just be normal. And intuitive, like people say, make the interface intuitive as a fork. If forks were so intuitive, it wouldn't have taken until the 1800s for them to be a common eating tool. Intuitive is a learned behavior. And so when you're looking at impacting the productivity of hundreds or thousands of employees, you need to understand how their findability, how their their process works, and design around that. It may be that you're lucky and you're like them, which is one of the reasons I think lawyers and librarians work well together, but when we work in other fields, we find it very different. So I was involved many years ago in reducing the death rate in one hospital by 20%. When we put one of the top things that hurts you in a hospital is something that the hospital does to you after you arrive that you did not have when you got there. There's some special term for that. I've forgotten what it is. And a lot of that is around drug contraindications and drug interactions. And so we had the big drug database, but we wanted to put it at the point of need when they were doling out the script for that drug. And so we put it on their phones and redesigned the XML database so it arrived with just the name of the drug. The second field for the doctors was the contraindications, and the third field was the dosage. For the nurses, it was a picture of the pill because doctors never know what the pill looks like. Someone else delivers it. It's often a nurse or an orderly. The second field was the dose because it's the nurses that check the dose. A lot of the resident doctors are very young and their memories may be flawed, whereas the nurses tend to be more mature and know their stuff inside and out and catch the doctor making dosage errors. And then the contraindications. But that's the three most important fields in a database that had like 800 fields in it, and they were all buried. And so if you're looking at it on a phone, you just want to have like 3 scrolls with running your thumb up the screen. And so how do you increase findability? But look at the impact of reducing the death rate from drug contraindications. And you sit there and say, is this worth doing? And were our professional skills valuable, that we understood the fields, the tags, and the most important information that was being used at the bedside?
I think that's a really good example. We have another kind of example we have for a client in the biotechnology area. Is they after they implemented, what they estimated is they were saving 1 hour of time doing research by over 1,000 research scientists on a daily basis. If you can save 1,000 folks an hour a day, it's a pretty big number, and if you can continue to do that, you'll get a lot of support.
But only if you tell people.
Yeah, only if you tell people. Exactly right. You got to tell the story. So the next topic is embedded, and really this is a question of whether you're waiting for the phone to ring, or are you inviting yourself out and your staff to key meetings in order to understand how the library can help various groups of information needs. For many of the above reasons that we've talked about, you can't wait for them to call you. You have to get out, you have to discover their needs, you want to build fans based on your ability to provide content that's relevant and makes their decision making better. And make sure that you help them understand what tools are available, and that you're there to help.
Now, the embedded words is sometimes misunderstood. You don't have to be all in. You can make several departments or individuals perceive you as their personal information professional, their secret sauce, their secret agent, their special service. It all comes down to relationships. So prioritize those relationships. Do you use a relationship management system? If your organization has a customer relationship management system, a CRM like Salesforce.com, then consider using it. Build profiles using your analytics, your ILS data, your online searching data, your internet behavioral data. Build personas, and then take the big step. Choose who's important, and it's not necessarily what the organization chart says. Then gradually develop a plan, a story, an elevator speech. A story you can deliver it on elevator speech, which isn't a magic bullet, but it at least opens up a conversation. It gives you permission to do a coffee break with someone and tell a longer story, to get a lunch meeting or a lunch, or go into the social mode and build gradually. By the end of your quarterly plans of who you've been talking to, you'll be more untouchable. Someone said in the comments, stories are fatally flawed, they're anecdotal evidence too easy to trash. And that's absolutely true if you don't have data to support it, if you don't have proofs. If you're just going to tell a fake story, then you're building no credibility. But if you've got something to back it up, and you have enough of a relationship to have them challenge you, then you can defend yourself because you've got your act together. Stories do work. Just watch the U.S. election right now, where they're moving needles with false information, and we're watching PolitiFact and the rest of them trying to disrupt the false stories that are going out on the campaign.
For a minute there,
Moves
Stephen, I thought you were going to say they were moving needles with haystacks, which
yeah.
may also be true. Last topic for today is content and connections. Libraries are very comfortable building the collection, but in an age where the library is part of the KM initiative, you also need to pay attention to helping users connect with each other. Can you integrate tools that build community into your website? Does your company have an enterprise social network, an ESN? Do you participate? If you think ESNs are a fad, think again. Younger professionals grew up on Facebook. They're used to getting content pushed to them via their social network activity stream. Why should content at work be any different? So just like Stephen's earlier comment about RSS feeds, you have amazing access to industry and company data. Can you help users create personal feeds for that content that is just for you? Also, what we find is that users sometimes don't turn to the library when they see content. They find it easier just to ask coworkers. So can you be active in your enterprise social network and respond to those type of requests, providing URLs and driving people back to the library and helping people understand that central collection? Librarians also make really good moderators in an ESN. If you think we don't need moderators, just go look at Wikipedia and the kinds of fights that people have over George W. Bush's entry or Ted Cruz's entry, so on and so forth. They now have to have moderators in those environments for around content. So content and connection plus connection is a very, very powerful place to be.
We've been through an evolution in librarianship, and it's one of the core debates of our field. We started off with content is king. Well, if it was king, our libraries full of books in the old age would have been kings, and they weren't. Then we moved on to context is king, and that's good because training, presentations, our shoulder-to-shoulder assistance of our patrons, our conversations, David Lanke's work on the librarian is conversation, the library is conversation, all good stuff, and it's all context setting. But it's not enough unless you got the connection is king. So the 3 C's in the right framework, content, context, and connection, that you're building the relationships that you need to do. So how do you get yourself out of the way when you don't add value? One of the questions here is, what do we do with passwords? And I continue to be surprised with librarians and our really good work of putting databases into intranets who are still passing out passwords. When you're in a controlled environment where only employees are allowed on your intranet and you're not embedding the passwords into a landing page that's invisible to the end user so that they don't have to know that or go through it or anything like that. I've certainly done it on entire states and entire provinces where we've licensed databases to an entire geographic area, and as long as someone came in with the IP authentication, they were into the database without having to put in barcodes or passwords or their email address or a whole bunch of irritating crap that gets in the way of the process. So we don't add value when we set ourselves up as some sort of gatekeeper. We add value when we set ourselves up as a gateway, and our best kind of gateway is when we make really good connections with our end users, where we're helping teams of users, connecting some of our users to other users who may not know they're working on the same project, that sort of stuff, when it meets the boundaries of ethics and privacy.
Great, and what that does is wraps it up, and I will just finish with a slide, which is what we refer to as the content positioning system. And do your users know the fastest way to find the content they seek? You can think of the library as like a GPS, a content positioning system. You want your users to use you as a tool to create and find paths to that content and the connections they seek. Future-proof your library by making you become the center of your end user's content strategy rather than being left behind, and really create that value that you really truly can bring to other users. And with that, what I'm going to do is open it up for any questions. We're past the hour. I apologize for that. But if there are any other questions at this point, we'll be happy to take questions for a few minutes. And if you cannot stay, we certainly understand. But if there are any questions, please ask away. So we have there's one question on mobile device access and the use of that. Stephen, do you have any comments on at-home devices?
So when they're using the at-home device and signing into your intranet, they're already in there to go into it. If they're using an at-home device and there isn't an intranet, you can build an IP level permission that gets them into it and removes those barriers on a landing page.
I agree, and some of the newer tools have methodologies for you to easily VPN in and beyond the network. And then the real question is in addition, is there a mobile interface to that environment? And as long as you're providing those two capabilities, then whether they're on a mobile device or not really doesn't matter. In fact, you know, for us, a lot of the mobile activity we see is sometimes, you know, people say, are people really doing research on their iPhone? And our answer, or typically when we talk to customers, it's not so much they're doing day-to-day research, but it's when they're maybe boarding the plane and they want to get that report just before they take off and they're offline for 3 hours. Can they use the mobile device to access the report, to download it, and then to read it offline in 4 hours, and they arrive at their destination ready and prepared because they had that mobile interface. That's the kind of thing we often see there. And again, if you can just VPN in, then you have access to that and also access to the external information.
And I've also seen this done in very high security frameworks where they're spy agencies or military, and it's built with a landing page that has end-to-end encryption, and they put the resources in there and restrict resources that might be more dangerous, but it's got end-to-end encryption on it built into the system.
Right, and there's another question on kind of publishing industry changes, folks going bankrupt, and kind of any crystal ball for subscription agents in particular.
I'd ask more if you're looking at subscription agents as ways to get aggregated content in digital format. My observation is that most special library situations, the print format isn't the dominant mode anymore, and I've seen many people not, like, you know, their subscription agent for print is different than using the same subscription agent for some of their databases, which is purely a play to reduce the cost of acquisition and to get normalized licenses. I think there's a future for them, but there's, what are there, 2 or 3 left?
Yeah, well, yeah, you know, and Stephen, I think we agree that, you know, one of the key things that we see going on is in a sense, you know, kind of the old model was the physical model. That's how special libraries got started. Kind of in the 80s and 90s, we moved to the virtual model. People moved to websites, and we saw the beginning of virtual content. And the problem is that's not just on your side, but that's very much on the publisher side. And the business of being in the physical publishing business and the business of being in the virtual publishing business, as we've seen with Amazon, the Kindle, ebooks, etc. It is a very, very, very different playing field. The fact that Apple and Amazon are major publishers and gateway and gatekeepers to content in terms of your access to content, the world is just changing very rapidly. So you will have access to those same materials, but they're going to be increasingly provided only on a virtual basis.
And the real trend is in these federated search providers and their A to Z lists, and the ones who are keeping the proper good lists of how do you access the electronic versions of things and make them searchable, and then building the linked data modules on top of it to create the discovery pathways for end users. And there's a middleware kind of human that is often a librarian who builds those pathways.
Absolutely. So we also have another question on kind of convergence, and we see convergence in a number of areas, but special librarianship, records management, archives, all of those areas are very much have very similar tasks and responsibilities. Any comments on that?
The library school I teach in has them all in one school, and also includes museum studies. We see them as all facets of the same problem, but when you view it from not our personal lens, but from the end user coming in special librarianship, we shouldn't be creating barriers by creating two different systems for internal and external information. So when we talked earlier about tiles, you can automatically say, okay, you just search this on a database, but here's what we have in our records, or our other space of proposals or research reports that were done internally, so that we're integrating internal and external information that improves decision making and improves the capacity to find.
Yeah, and we certainly see convergence in our customer base. We see often the library it's a library plus the records management piece. We see the library in charge of the archives, and records management tends to have a much heavier compliance aspect to it. But we still see the skill set of organizing and that information, curating it, and keeping it ready for folks. Now, we often see what we find interesting in records management is records management being the vault. It's compliance focused, so that you can pull up a record and show some regulatory agency that you have the secret formula or how you did something else. But the often sometimes very, very critical IP can get buried in the records management application. It's not built for information discovery. So the real question is, can you also provide linkages and ways in which your library can make that information more accessible? We've done that for a number of companies in the life sciences arena, et cetera. So think about where is your IP buried, and even though the librarianship may say, I cover all of these things, the tools and the tech that you end up with may make the other half of the job, information discovery, much less interesting or much harder for end users to leverage that content, and you want to think about that.